to be both clever and moving at the same time. So I'll start with this poem by Elizabeth Bishop, One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, but their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers and a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like write it, like disaster. I'll end with the poem Censorship by Karen Brodeen, a poet, radical member of Radical Women and the Freedom Socialist Party. This is a poem of 2 parts. The first, called The Words, is about the censorship of women in their work lives, their homes, and their families. Karen says, all my life, the urgency to speak, which she wrote was embodied in her grandmother, her mother, and herself. And then the pull toward silence, which was insisted upon, sometimes forcefully and derisively, by her father. The second part is called Smuggling Books Across the Border. Interestingly, there's a connection between this and a story about Tamara, who at one point in her life had ordered some lesbian books from Europe, but she knew they'd be rejected as pornography by US postal censors. So she had them shipped to Canada, and she smuggled them across the border herself. Something she thoroughly enjoyed and was very proud of doing. So, part 2 of censorship, smuggling books across the border. This time the censorship was a cop car floating along the Oregon coast. We didn't see it at first, incognito colors and just blinking its parking lights slowly. So that cop followed us for miles and kept inventing mistakes till they came to $94. We were all quiet and nervous. He barricaded our car in the driveway with his, for 3 of us being Asian. The ghost of his car followed us all the way home. In the unemployment office, they are teaching people in groups how to fill out the forms. It will take 2 unemployment checks to pay that ticket. I'm just glad the cop didn't look in the trunk where the socialist books were packed. A long time ago, my mother put socialist books in the trunk. Someone called on the phone to tell me, 5 years old, "Your parents are commies. We're going to get you." I hung around my dad all day, silent and scared, because I thought if I told him, then it would come true. Saying it would make it come true. Clara sits late at night talking about censorship in the 50s and sneaking pamphlets across the Canadian border in her baby's diapers. That was the fattest baby you ever saw. In that same era, my mom was sitting in the kitchen saying things under her breath, afraid my dad would explode. They are banning more books now than during the Cold War, while they print stereotypes of our lives. We watch caricatures vaguely resembling ourselves giggle and simper on the screen. But they can't shut us up. Memory drags out of us, kicking and screaming, bursting like pomegranate seeds, tart and succulent. At work, we stack slabs of dynamite wrapped in butcher paper. We hoist each slab up delicately while the boss watches from a distance. The paper around the explosive unfolds into a cloth, a sheet against the wind. All these words to live in, swim in, that snap like alligators' teeth. Now we're a coil, a circle, a group of people protesting the Fu Manchu film, outdoors in rough terrain, a coil of shouting, chanting people moving in a circle, sturdy, unending, pulling us in, holding us up, covering the ground. On the picket line, the women's voices are the strongest. One Chicana's voice rises, a tough wire in the wind, leading the changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Now is the time for those of you who would like to make your own brief toast, Tamara, possibly a roast. Now is your time, and someone, Gina, will be moving among you with a microphone as we're recording this. So would anyone like to add a few words? Please.
Well, I thought it might be interesting for you to hear a point of view from Tamara's hairstylist. I've known Tamara for probably over 40 years. When I first had my first salon in Pioneer Square, she came and she listened to my philosophy about my business. And I told her, well, I didn't really believe in commissions. I think these new people should be getting training. I want my business to get back to the community and good things. And that's all it took. And Tamara took me under her wings. And she just loyally followed me, even though for many years I quit cutting hair because I had 2 salons. And she stayed away during that time. But then in the last 5 years, she found me again. And there she was at the doorstep saying, I heard you're cutting hair again. Here I am. So, few little stories about Tamara. She knew that I was doing a lot of, fundraiser every year for the animals because I'm an animal advocate. And she came up to me and she said, well, did you know that there are some other animal agencies besides the one that you're supporting? And I said, well, I'm already doing 3 or 4. I don't know how I could add any more. Well, she said, there's a really nice place in Sequim, Washington called the Precious Life Animal Sanctuary. And my brother really needs help. And she explained to him about how Ralph was so sad because these animals were just he lost 2 dogs. Or she would just explain to me about Ralph and Carol, and I think that you should consider adding them onto your list. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So since then, I've gotten to this is the first time I met Ralph and Carol, but I've known about you for a while now. And so they're on my list now. So then one day she comes in and she says to me, Kay, somebody called me sir when I was out in the street. And what are you going to do about that? And I said, well, Tamara, I said, maybe there are some things I could suggest as your hairstylist. You could try wearing lipstick. Lipstick? She says, I'm not going to do that. I said, well, you could try wearing a skirt. Oh, no way. So she said to me, what do you think if I grew my hair a little bit? Well, that's an idea. So I said, well, let's just try letting your hair grow. So I didn't cut it as short that time. Week later, phone rang, and she said, I'm coming in. I do not want my hair this long. And I said, Tamara, your hair's not even long. And she says, it's too long for me. We're going back. I don't care if they call me sir. I want my short hair. And in the last 5 years, she noticed that I like to write. And she said, Kate, you need to share your story. And so she started to support me about my writing. And she would send me books, and she gave me a dictionary, and she gave me some books on Japanese internment in World War II, and she wanted me to read all that because I was writing my memoir about World War II at that time. So she saw me through writing that book, and then I started to write. My book was just published, and I'm sorry that Tamara didn't get a chance to read it, the finished version. But she wanted me to keep sending her chapters of my book as I was writing. And she started to tell me, I think we need to find a really good name for your book. So I would come up with these names. And then she finally helped me to come up with this name called Sheer Determination, Swimming Upstream in a Downstream World. She said, I like that. That's the name of your book. And so, in the last months here, she said, send me your chapter. And she wanted to keep reading my chapters. So, I'm just going to miss her so much. And I feel like everybody else in this room, we all got so much from her, and that's what I just have to say.
That's wonderful. So your book is published now.
Yes.
Sheer Determination. And your full name?
My name is Keiko K. Hirai. My name is Keiko K. Hirai.
Great. Thank you. All right. And who else would like to say something? I can't believe such a silent room at Tamara's memorial.
Well, I was on many Freedom Socialist production crews with Tamara. It used to be that putting out the newspaper would go on for weeks, and we'd get about 3 hours of sleep a night during that period. And we got pretty giddy, pretty silly. And Tamara started doing our little underground or unauthorized newspaper called the Socialist, which we have some samples over there, with all kinds of puns and parodies and skewering groups on the left. I think she was also like a real pusher on the technology. We, sort of both ran that old mimeograph machine, and she pushed us forward to new heights of electrostencil mimeographs and IBM Selectrics with movable type balls, and so pushing the envelope of technology there in the early 70s. And our leaflets and documents really had very high quality given the technology we had available. So Tamara added a lot on many levels, but she and I went back a long time, and she'll be missed deeply.
Yeah, I first met Tamara in the 70s as a college student, and I was very dubious about an older person telling me anything. And we were sitting in a really dark, dingy bar in Pioneer Square, a gay bar that let the women come in on Thursday nights, I think it was anyway, for women's nights. So we were there, and she was telling me about the history of the struggle that they had just to get the bars, and the corruption in the police chief and the payoffs, and I was telling her about the police brutality that's happening. And at that time, there was harassment of gays in the bars and on the streets. And I was telling her we were organizing around that. And she looked at me and she said, well, you're not the only group that faces that, I said, well, you're right, Tamara. And she said, rattling off all these names of Black, Chicano, Latino people had been killed by the police. And I think that discussion has lived with me ever since. I also wanted to read something from another person from that era, Marcel Hatch, who's now in Havana, Cuba. He was sorry to not be here, but he was worked with her as a co-founder on the Freedom Socialist newspaper. And he says, briefly, she chose the only organization of their era embracing both gays and gaiety. She was forever young, always witty, someone cantankerous, and positively confrontational. Thank you, Tamara, for bringing laughter to the struggle and your many brilliant and astute contributions. You inspired a generation of women and men to become proud and confident in expressing affection for each other lovingly. May every memory of you bring an irrepressible smile. Marcel Hatch, Havana. So.
Did I see a hand somewhere in here?
So I know Tamara through Raya, and I stayed at her house when I first moved here. And I have so many stories. One of my favorites, though, is that in recent years she became interested in Buddhism. And she asked me about my group, because I'm a Buddhist. And I was terrified because she wanted to go to my Buddhist group. And you know what Tamara's like in a group, right? And in this group, it was even harder for me because in this group, the teachers teach and no one spoke at the time. So there were no questions, there were no comments. And so she kept talking to me and she kept asking me, and I would put her off, like, well, I don't know, Tamara, I just don't know if you'd really like it or not, and there's no commentary, there's no questions. And so finally, I said, okay, well, so I called my teachers. That was a whole story. I said, look, I don't know if you really want this person in your group. She's going to talk. She's going to have all kinds of, things to say. So they called her. And of course, stayed on the phone for 45 minutes. They absolutely fell in love, and she has been just a wonderful member of our group, and I know that her two teachers would love to be here today. They're not here today. This is and they started, that's true, they did start accepting questions. And now there's even people talking back and forth in class, which never used to happen at all. So I think Ralph said the word fearless about Tamara. I was in a car once, and I think it was with Raya and Tamara, and you know what it's like being in a car with Raya and Tamara driving. Those of you, yes, if you're laughing. Me. Which is even worse, because then they're both fighting about which direction we should go. But anyway, this is Tamara, and it was such a lesson for me. We were on the Montlake Bridge, and there was a man hitting a woman across the bridge. And Tamara opened up the window, and she said, "You stop that. I see you." And to me, that is just, I was so startled. But to me, that's Tamara. She saw someone hurting someone, and she was not afraid, even in a car on the other side of the street, to say, "You stop that, I see you." And I try to be like that, to pay attention, because she was such a role model in that way. Fearless, absolutely fearless.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll wrap it up so that we can talk more informally.
To me, Tamara was dynamic and cheerful. And she had told me that she was ill, but I did not realize how far advanced her illness already was. And I'm sorry that I did not have the chance to say goodbye to her. One thing that I remember quite profoundly from Tamara was when, some years ago, we did a New Year's Eve